to be part of this. The idea around this is, as you know, is to, it's around security and to have an open discussion about security. I've got Kurt Hansen, my MD over here, and I've got Philip Dumitru, who's our head of engineering, in case it goes technical. But with no further ado,
always a technical question.
That's right. Yes.
Oh, pressure.
Let me introduce Kurt, and then we can progress from there.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
So I think I know about half the people in the room, so it's great to be here and catch up with you. Last time I think I was at F5 and we were just talking to you about that. So we're not here to talk about Checkpoint, but I found there was a bit of interest as well, so we can give you an update on that if there's any questions. There's some real cool material that Chris has issued. I think one of the reasons for doing this is we have an obligation in security to educate. We've also got Alistair MacGibbon, who's my colleague from Dimension Data, who runs the security practice at Dimension Data, our largest and strongest partner in this particular part of the world, and Alistair comes from a strong security background outside of Dimension Data too, so he'll have a lot of impacts. And I'm really pleased to have Johan, who's one of our customers from LEK Consulting, IT manager there, and has implemented a lot of our solutions to keep the bad guys out and keep his network going. So he's certainly got a few different perspectives. And of course, my SC security engineering manager, who runs our engineering team of growing from about 13 people locally to
14 today to 21.
To 21 today. So we're going through a bit of a period of accelerated growth at the moment. And adding about 20 people overall to our subsidiary of 60 odd people, which is quite. I can only ever remember doing this back in my Cisco days. Of just every one of my managers has got open headcount, and we're sort of hiring very, very busily. And the market is really sort of growing, and there's a lot of things to talk about and new solutions that customers are needing. And we've spoken a bit about that in the top 7 that we've sort of issued of the things that we can go through and talk about today, I think more formally than me sort of making a presentation. And I think the highlights there is around the stuff that's happening with zero-day malware. In my mind, is the unknown unknowns, and also mobile. And there was 100 IT managers locally surveyed out of 700 globally that have made some really interesting perspectives on mobile. And I was talking to Johan about it as well. As I don't think you were surveyed, Johan, but certainly the acceleration of mobile applications is extending that mobile edge, which is giving everybody a real headache to know how to secure that. We don't have all the answers at Checkpoint, but we are very much focused on that as well. And there's certainly and I think the other thing around, with what's happening geopolitically, critical infrastructure. We're starting to see utility firms in our customer base sort of spend 7-figure sums protecting their infrastructure around power, water, gas, roads, rail, and I think that's becoming an increasingly important attack vector as well. And of course the Internet of Things, so there's a lot of things happening there. I won't go through them all, but please have a peruse, and I think the best way those work is just simply ask questions, and I won't have all the answers, but I think I've got the assembled brains of our customer and partner and ourselves here to talk to about. So what's happening with the meal? We've all made an order.
We've ordered, and I think the first is going to arrive shortly. So,
yeah.
So I think whilst we wait, we can still, if there's any questions, any sort of things we can raise, we will obviously try and answer everything. And James.
James, it's shocking that you'd ask a question.
I've got a reputation about that.
It's a rare.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Always the first.
Kurt, actually, it's something that you raised in terms of having teams with 20 open headcount, and Alistair, I'd be very interested in your take on this one as well. Talking to a number of CISOs across the country, the larger the organisation, the more interested they are in fleshing out their deputy layer and getting those people, with the skills that can actually understand security and actually talk to the business. You guys have know this as well, and I'm interested in your perspective on how does this play out over the next couple of years, because I'm seeing a bit of a crunch. So, Alistair.
So I think you're right, James. I think it's what is the skills pool that we're drawing upon, and is it large enough for the demands? And one of the ways I'd answer that is by saying that we are seeing a shift in the way businesses are dealing with IT security issues on a couple of fronts. One, you're right, it can't just be technical, it needs to be able to talk to business. That's a different type of person to just your technical one. And they're particularly hard, right, because they're the translators between how do you define this problem technically and then articulate it to a business to justify the ROI or the risk and all those other things. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, we need to be smarter in how we're doing it. We are seeing that shift. We're seeing a shift dramatically towards managed security services, where even in some very large organisations that traditionally would have a very big IT security staff, some of the largest, who can usually afford to pay pretty good wages, are having difficulty filling those positions. So the way to do it, of course, is to scale and reuse people across more than one business. That doesn't mean you outsource all of your security functions. It doesn't mean that you have no IT security staff, that you don't have a CISO and don't have all those other people. It means, frankly, that you have those people, some really smart business people who can help define the risk, identify the risk in the business, define it and articulate it, and then purchase those skills in. The fastest growing part of the business that Dimension Data runs in security practice is the managed security service side. And that's because businesses are increasingly realising that it takes multiple bits of technology, possibly across multiple vendors, that need to be, what it says on the box in terms of how you plug it, and it does, and often it does, doesn't always, and it will require people to manage that for you and interpret that output and then respond to the threats.
And the mileage may vary.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Just like your stock options and things. So I think that we'll just see, businesses, take time to change, and they'll keep trying to hire people. And clearly, we all need to have skilled people, and then we'll have to work out how we share those, and that's managed security.
To turn that on its head, then, if you've got these skills, you've got two options. I can go and work for a specific company. I can go and work for you guys. What are you going to do to attract those people?
Because, that's a great question. That's a really good question. Pay more? And I don't know whether we do. So I think it's really the variance. And I think ultimately the industry changes. At the moment there's a lot of competition in terms of hiring people, there's no doubt. And so, by its nature, that's when you're drawing upon a limited number of people and there's more holes to fill, by the very nature it's going to be an interesting thing. And eventually I think people will work out.
How many holes have you got, Alistair?
We've got open headcount if you know some good people.
Everyone's got open headcount.
Feel free to send over your any resumes that people send to you. So I don't know, you just make it an attractive workplace, right? And so that's all of those sort of soft things that get employees. And I think it's the variance of the work. So it's sometimes hard to get people to sit and watch that single pane of glass too, of course, especially if it's a night shift on the weekend. And so if you're running a SOC, you don't want to be trying to start a SOC yourself as a business. Only the biggest businesses can afford to do that. Instead, we employ those people and then take the feeds in.
And I think what that's creating, we're still seeing big business employ those people, ostensibly architect and make the purchasing decisions and all that good stuff. But there's definitely that change that you mentioned, data stack, we should invest in. The complexity for us is also, as a vendor starts off early. Those of you who know Scott many years ago, you were very channel centric because you're small, and then you build a business, and then you become a bit more what we call high touch. Deal more with end users they want you to deal with them. Now we're starting to see we've actually got to circle back and spend more time with organisations like you mentioned, data, because they are doing. New Zealand's I think made that transition quicker. So I know in our New Zealand business, we are far more selling to the managed service providers around which firewall to use, what architecture to use, than we are the end user customer. I think because of the smaller scale of the market, they might have shifted they're in that shift a bit quicker.
And we've done some interesting things with companies like Checkpoint in terms of how companies acquire technology or rent it, or we own it and then essentially sell it back. To try to, so it's not just the people, but it's also the way that the technology is employed through that MSS business and the link between companies like DD and Checkpoint. So I think I genuinely think that's the future of how we have to solve this problem. And again, it can be a hybrid where you have a large IT security staff who still bring in certain things, or you essentially have a couple of really smart people and buy in those services.
I mean, to add to that, what we've done is we actually have a graduate program to address this area. So we've got an engineering graduate program where where we're actually picking up kids straight from university and giving them a whole, we send them off for about 3 months to headquarters, either to the US or Israel.
We had it in our largest moves in Israel, in London, and in the US, and so I brought it here when I got here a year ago. We're bringing them straight out of university, whatever discipline, and also now engineering, graduate straight in. So I think that's a great sort of sign for a vendor of our size to actually and recognise the need to develop that, because we just can't go out and hire somebody with 10-year skills about this security. We have to actually teach them, coach and build it.
Are the unis doing enough to build the courses to do this?
No. The uni's doing enough of anything, David, isn't it?
And that's, to that question, I was going to say that's where a program's been put in place by Checkpoint headquarters, where any of the grads that do come on board, we send them to Tel Aviv, essentially for a 14-week program, 2 loads of 7 weeks, where it might be, call it a cut-down uni, where we're teaching them not just corporate messaging and branding and all the rest of the stuff, but actually going into security and fleshing out what it is they do know, what it is they don't know, and aligning them with trends that are happening in the industry, how security evolved from back when I graduated in the late 90s, early 90s, to what it is today. What type of threats, what are the targets, etc. So stripping it back to basics and then getting a lot more advanced as they progress to the end of that 14-week program. Just to
getting them out of uni waiting too long though.
Sorry?
Is getting them out of uni waiting too long.
So
Well,
are we teaching enough STEM?
Yeah.
You know,
Do you have
way
like
back?
partnerships with some universities to provide some,
Yes.
all these capstone projects that they have in uni?
Yes, so so DD has a graduate program as well, but we are also talking to some of the IT security course providers at universities to try to step up and create employment opportunities for their students. But to your question, James, are we giving enough emphasis on STEM going way back into school? Well, the chief scientist in Australia says no. It's a chronic problem in Australia.
Yeah, it's a bigger issue of just not having enough IT graduates. I mean, just had 2 children leave year 12, and look at how many people have gone into IT from those 2, big private schools in Melbourne. There's not enough. They're all going to business and arts and.
So yours went into business and arts?
Yes.
You're not helping.
Well, one of them's going to be a teacher, so that's good. But
That's the 20-year end game.
But that's exactly right. So I couldn't convince my son to get into IT. It would have been great, but he was interested in other things. So I think there's a big shift away there in general.
Just from that, how many of you? It'll be interesting to see at least around Checkpoint, and I'll keep it to 5 minutes. How much do you know about Checkpoint as a company? Just the background. Do you class it as? What do you know about Checkpoint?
Some of them more than I did, but they knew Scotland.
Yeah. Is it? It'll be interesting because I was talking to a couple, and it's classed as we're a firewall company, or do you class it as a security company? I'll be really interested to find out if there's some opinions. Do you know a lot about Checkpoint? Do you know we have more than a third of people? Out of the 3,000 staff, we've got a third of them are in R&D. A lot of them headquartered out of Israel. Do you know that we do more than firewalls? So it's just interesting to see what your opinions are, or what do you know about Checkpoint?
You mean you're not
Alex?
the company that puts checkpoints in all those games they play on Xbox? The wrong
Checkpoint
event?
Charlies?
Yeah, that's it. Well, clearly we must know something, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I
We're here
just
to
saw
learn.
the word
Yeah.
lunch on
Yeah.
the
That's
window
right,
and I stopped reading.
No. It's we've obviously evolved from 21 years ago, and there is a fact sheet in the pack. So if there's any questions around that.
So all covered in the fact sheet.
It's fair to say you guys use your firewall install base as the way to then hook out into those other parts of security, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I mean, the founder of the company, who's still our CEO, Gil, invented the firewall 23 years ago. And patented it, and so more than 2 decades. There aren't many companies, I guess, of our size. We're $1.5 billion. As Chris said, 3,000 people, strong in many different markets, and the lower end as well. I think one of the recent initiatives is to get into that SMB space. It wasn't sort of listed there as the top 7 things, but we see a lot of the attacks moving down the stack into small, medium business, and there's a knowledge there that you need endpoint protection, but there's no knowledge in that SMB space. There's no IT managers that look after an SMB business, so we're starting to see a lot more interest in that end of the market as well.
I think to the credit of the company, you guys have actually moved into that SMB space as well. Because if you run a small business, or a small consultancy or something else, really your options, unless you have a box like this, is an AV at the endpoint and maybe a software firewall and patching your computer, which is the advice I've been giving for 15 years to people.
Thank you.
And it's good advice, right? But if you're a small business, you need a lot more. And until those sort of UTMs, you call them, are available and cost effective, then
And easy to manage.
plug it in and make it work, then it will fail. And you're right, because if you think about the supply chain concept into a big institution anyway, it's often the smallest that might be that entry point into it.
Well, Tiger was the classic example, wasn't it?
Tiger?
Tiger.
Oh, Tiger, yes, I was going
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely,
HVAC
the
guy.
HVAC guy, absolutely. I think it's Tiger.
What's happened to Tiger?
Is that Tiger ready?
So what was Tiger?
Target.
Oh, Target.
Yeah,
Target.
the HVAC
Target. Oh,
guy
yeah.
was the entry point
Yeah.
right into the whole Target thing. So, and it comes to the point that Kurt was making before about mobile and the interaction that you have now with your suppliers and customers and staff. It's just impossible to view these things as pillars of protected light in an otherwise dark world. They need to be much smarter in the applications and the devices that you deploy in networks.
Do you think there's a lack of knowledge, especially in SMBs, about the technology issue?
I think there's a willful blindness. I think there's a willful blindness and a wing and a prayer.
Right.
You know, I just hope it doesn't happen to me. I used to talk about this thing called the wildebeest mentality, right? And I think online the wildebeest mentality used to work. And the way the wildebeest survives on the savannah is they travel in a really big pack, and the lions will only pick off the slow, the weak, the sick, and the young, right? But the majority of the DNA will make it across the savannah and the rivers and get to where the grass is, and they'll live. And that mentality worked well online for a while until you could scale attacks and automate them. And now every endpoint is subjected to endless attacks, which means as a small business, if you think you're hiding in the crowd, you're not, because every one of you is individually looked at, not necessarily by a human, but certainly targeted.
Profile.
Yeah.
And I think
Alistair, do you think it's willful blindness though, or do you think it is actually still sheer ignorance?
So you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know if you're compromised often, whether your computer's being used as a relay point or a storage place or just an attack vector for someone else, or if your stuff's been exfiltrated. How do I know? Until it's been abused, right? My credit card might have been stolen until it's been used. I don't know it's been stolen. My IP, if I'm manufacturing a good or a service, and I don't know it's being replicated in factories until it's on the shelves, I don't know I've lost it yet. I do think there's an element of willful blindness, and I do think there's an element of people just not knowing it applies to them. And that's a mistake of us as an industry, and also, frankly, the manufacturers of goods that should be shipping them as fit for purpose as well.
I wouldn't call it ignorance. I think it's also the element of the naivety within the consumers or the people that are protected by a blanket kind of corporate IT policy. So, for example, you know, we're having a conversation earlier today with Chris. There's a spy in your pocket. You know, essentially everyone's mobile device, location awareness, all the rest of it. You download an app. The app could be, I don't know, a spirit level or a torch, and it asks you, do you want to accept location awareness to be enabled here? Why do those things need to be enabled for that application? And the person, we don't know who's developed that app. It's a free app put together by person X. We just gone to an app store, downloaded it. It's giving us.
Promoted by strange email?
Yeah, correct. Well, not necessarily by strange email, but from a legitimate app store. But what potentially is happening there. So I think the element of naivety, the element of just trusting what you download without knowing what it is you're downloading. When you're outside the realm of a corporate security blanket, a corporate security policy where there may be set practices in place, is a key reason why there's going to be a massive, or continue to be a massive spike and a massive impact to that SMB SOHO type space.
From the conversations we have with CIOs and also from the surveys that we run, we can see that there's now an increasing of the awareness that people have of the security problems and like the weakness that they can have. But what we can see out of there as well is that they don't really know what to do about it.
Yeah.
So it's not well, from my understanding, it's more like a obligation of what to do to protect ourselves and what assets are at risk, which is not only in our financial data, which is at risk, all the data that
You're right, I'm just wondering, it's probably business by business and sector by sector. I work in the management consulting. The holy grail for us is the client confidentiality. This is our holy grail, and we protect this client confidentiality information as much as we can. So at the board level or the partner level, we recognize there is a threat, and then we have to respond if we're going to be breached, and it will be breached Monday. Don't know when, tomorrow, and then 10 years, 15 years, will be breached Monday. And how they respond to that breach is part of the partnership objective and strategy. In terms of the IT strategy following that breach, how we overcome the breach, we say the holy grail is the client information. Then we have a very high organized attack, say state sponsor, organized crime, that's one. And the other one is hackers. So that's the second part. Internally, we have users. Then we also have sysadmin, which is the IT people. So we look at typical management consulting, we analyze it that way. So we have 4 different things. So we start looking at every area. The state-owned or state-sponsored organized crime, I think we cannot do anything like that. If they want to attack us, they will attack us. So we're looking at the typical hacker, and that's why we're dealing with checkpoint. We put so many measures, we put mobility, BYOD measures. Then we put something to monitor the internal users. Then we start putting logging, auditing to monitor the sysadmin, the IT people who has full access to everything we have. So once you start putting all these things, then you just keep improving it every year based on what the business needs to do. So to me, it's probably case by case. We're not dealing with electronic payments, so thank God for that, so we don't have to protect that. We don't have to protect our e-commerce because we don't have any e-commerce. So our protection is solely for client information because we do case and project work. If you go to a different business, then it's probably different. So it's really hard to generalize what sort of protection you have to have. It's probably need to be what industry you're in. If you are small business, what is the level of small business? Is it like below 500 and then below 3,000 or enterprise? Then you start looking at what they need to do because generalizing the whole sector is a bit hard.
And you're in a really interesting situation, aren't you? Because, you know, with LEK, you're going to be getting emails to your consultants and so on that are going to be coming from CEOs and CFOs, which are going to be containing massively sensitive information, share price impacting information. And within the confines of their organisations, protected by their security teams, and they can have upwards of 100 people or so. Do they come to you and say, what kind of checks and controls do you have to
Yeah, it's part of the, we see that more and more now. When you do the agreement with the client, then they start saying what sort of security measures you have, how you protect the information, that sort of thing. And it's part of the client agreement. And before, 5 years ago, we probably don't see that.
Yeah.
And then now we see that a lot more.
Are they trusting you to self-report, or are they asking for you to be audited?
We say this is the sort of measures we have, and if they want to go into any type of levels, we can provide them with the information. And we're pretty high on file access. So for example, if the case has been completed, the only person that have full access to that case is the partner. And anyone else needs to ask the partner for access. So we fully audited that, and then if you say who accessed the file, what changes, who what when, you can actually provide that sort of information. And I was working in the IT company, we never see that sort of measure. But this one is very, very into protecting the client information and who touched, who created, who
You've got a level of information handling maturity that most government agencies would be envious of.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's quite interesting. And then we have a major project now. We have to actually put a dedicated file server physically. So everything can be
contained, can be audited, up to that sort of level.
Johan, how do you see the threat from mobile? And
We are pretty much the early adopter of the BYOD. So 2.5 years ago, we reviewed all the various players. We chose good. And some people in the industry saying, good is like driving a tank across George Street. And I say, no.
As my client said, it's good, but it's never been great.
And I say, the management wants security, this is what we provide. And then double login, and then they have to put so many things. They cannot access their photos, they cannot do a lot of things. This is part of the security measure. And over time, good is improving the apps, and then you can see a lot more. And now we see Checkpoint is bringing Capsule. And I was telling you, Kurt, saying, it's really interesting. With the mobility apps, with the BYOD apps, it's become a bit more disposable now. As long as we can improve the user experience, and we say, I'll give you email, I'll give you calendar, I'll give you contacts in a much better way than what you have now, they say, give it to me. Because it's just one of the 100 apps they have. And they're really pretty agile, pretty adaptive. Yeah, so to me, it's really good. It's not like, you implement a CRM, let's change from one CRM to another one. Whoa, don't ever bring that subject, right? But changing the mobility apps is quite pretty, is an option that we can do now. Which is
not often I've had one of my customers sell me back a product. But thank you for that.
Yeah, so I just want to, hopefully that answer that. It's just a different level for different industry and different level of business.
But because of your business, you also probably have a better awareness of what your risks are as a consulting company.
Yeah.
That's basically your core business.
I mean, I'm very naive. I say to the partner, if you do personal banking and then your account gets breached, and the insurance will pay you, right? And the partner says, Johan, if your company gets breached, there's no insurance. It's your name.
Yeah.
That's the difference between what you do on personal banking than what we try to protect now. So it's really, sometimes they tell you what you don't really think about, right? You're just thinking, I just do personal banking, 4 PIN. If I lost $1,000, I'll go to Westpac, someone breached me, and then someone paid. But in the name, in the company branding, there is no such insurance. And that's what they have to protect as well. They don't want their name to be in the paper. That's
actually just
at the end of the day, that's what they don't want.
Christmas, I was at a lunch on a fortune and sitting next to Bernie Brooks, the CEO of Myers, and we were talking about targets. I said, the CEO lost his job, the CIO lost his job. And he said it was much more serious than that. He said that there was this global retail association. That association excommunicated Target from the group because of the impact of the brand, the impact of what they haven't. They put them in the penalty box.
So about this, about the risk and the reputation of companies, in Australia we don't have the obligation to lodge the rankings yet, and it's most likely after everything that's happening in Europe and the US, that it's going to happen in the next, depending, few months or years, depending on the government. Do you think this will strongly affect the investments in IT, in security?
We should look to the man who was in Canberra for the response.
So the federal government, how many 6 months ago was it? If I said it was 6 years or 6 months ago, had said, so it was the previous government, had said that it would take them 6 months to, they were looking at two tranches, weren't they, of the legislation, and the concept of data breach was in the second one. It raises its head there as well. I'm a supporter of it. I hear all the arguments against data breach notification, that people will become just totally sick of hearing breaches of fear of so many that they'll become immune to it. That's great, but at the moment we're in a market that requires transparency to make rational decisions. We don't have information necessary. Now, of course, if I don't know I've been breached, I can't report it. And that's part of the problem, is the awareness side. We're seeing an awful lot of companies now that's coming to us saying, could you just do assessments of where we stand? To your first question, I know I've got threats. I'm not stupid. I'm a big enough company to know I've got threats, but there seem to be so many. How do I put them in an order that how do I eat that elephant? which end do I start at?
What's the priority? What's the defence priority?
What's the priority? Now, there's a lot of arguments against the whole risk approach towards security too. Of course, you just keep working down until you find the threat that was a low risk, you make it a high risk, and you move laterally across an organisation, and then it was suddenly the new high risk threat. But organisations are increasingly asking those types of questions. And until you know that you've been breached, you can't say that you've been breached. And until the government says you have to be breached, most companies are going to say they're breached. I think there are obligations about reporting crimes. You know, if you know of a serious indictable offence as an individual, it's illegal for you not to report it to law enforcement. There are an awful lot of corporate counsels out there giving advice to companies saying don't report this serious indictable offence to any authority. And I think that's wrong. It's wrong.
There's a lot of mid-level managers that are stopping the information being reported upwards because they know it's going to impact it.
And so that's, when you have a culture where we fear talking about the truth, and the truth is there are breaches everywhere, there's vulnerability everywhere, and because we've built this thing on sand and we've told ourselves often enough that this is safe enough for us to be doing business, then how do you break from that culture? And the only way you can break from that culture, frankly, is a regulatory approach, because the market itself isn't doing that. Because there's too many vested interests in the market not to tell the truth about vulnerabilities, and the truth of breaches, and the truth of that risk order and whether you've started eating the elephant at all. And until you create a regime that mandates that you report a problem and that there are penalties associated with that, so that's the stick, and that there's a carrot associated with it if you've been seen to be doing the right thing. What that right thing, I don't know. Is it you know, following 27001? Is it showing that you've had regular penetration tests that are, you know, reasonably pervasive? I don't know what it is. But there needs to be a carrot and a stick and a regulation that goes with it. And then there needs to be this self-awareness side where businesses go out and say, well, tell me what's happening. And yes, there'd be some growth there in the IT security industry, clearly.
Explosive.
But then I go back to the product safety statement I made before, and things being fit for purpose. You know, we wouldn't tolerate unfit for purpose glasses that you're drinking from, or glass that sits behind you there, that if you fell through it, you'd be totally cut, or the fact that you even fall through it.
Or the fact that you have to wear seatbelts.
Yeah, I mean, we've learnt, and businesses flourished when it's given those rails and told, here's how you have to operate. And clearly in this industry we haven't laid those rails to create that direction, and I think that's the problem. And you know, if you told me when I set up the High-Tech Crime Centre back in 2001 or something like that, that we'd be having the same conversation 14 years later, I'd laugh at you. The threat environment has increased dramatically. The amount of technology we're using has increased dramatically. And the level of public discourse and frankly corporate action on this stuff has only crawled along. And so has the government response to it. So that's a disconnect between the reality and you know,
what do you think it'll be like 14 years from now?
I don't know, we'll all be employed still, which is good.
And some people will still be using Windows XP.
That's right, some will still be using Windows XP. That's why it's
The ticketing machines.
I don't know, maybe we'll get our kids into IT security and they'll be gainful employed. Yes. I don't know. It's a tough one, but I hope we're not having the same conversation.
My friend on the right here said a lot of their clients are really worried about is having their name in the newspapers. Now, most of the journalists here interested is quite the opposite, to get the names into the newspaper. How do you feel about that?
No. Have you seen how many recorders are going around?
David, this time I wasn't leery. I wasn't leery over my prawns.
That's a great question. You know, so there are tensions there. But the media plays a really important role in highlighting these incidents. You know, it's remarkable to me just how much reporting there is now of cybersecurity issues. But we need to have that gain traction. And if it is people being, if it is CEO, well, boards are responsible, right? Directors of companies are responsible for what happens. We need to use the audit and risk committees. That includes IT, and that they need to act and not be bamboozled. And they need to know the questions to ask their IT staff, their CIOs and CISOs about the protection. To be told, So if James was the CISO and I'm the chair of the board, and I say, so James, we protect you? He goes, yeah, we are. Two big thumbs, two thumbs up. Our life's good.
We've got some firewalls. We're all good.
Yeah, life's good. Yeah. Then, and I don't know the next question to ask. I don't have an independent person coming in and telling me, you're sure? That's right. Yes. Doubly sure.
What are the processes you've got around managing that?
Yep, absolutely.
How do you change security policies?
Yeah, and you know, one of the key things we're seeing is increasingly the organisations that do care about this stuff doing these 5 drills, working out what happens when things go wrong. Because invariably, no matter how security right, this is not telling you guys anything new, things will go wrong. Right? The question is the frequency, how long it goes wrong for before you know it's gone wrong, and then how you minimise the damage and recover and get back up and running. It's this resilience concept, right? And I think that's been a significant development in IT security language, where we've adopted the sort of bushfire / natural disaster type terminologies. You can't stop bushfires. You can just try to stop them spreading to the most risky areas and recover from them faster. Yeah, it's the same with IT security, but you only do that if you do the 5 drills.
But this comes back to my first question, which was about that, the people on the security side that can actually talk to the business people. Because obviously there's a risk and governance aspect for the board to start getting interested in cybersecurity, but these people are all from accounting and legal backgrounds, and how many of them have got an IT background, so the knowledge gap for them to understand technology and then the cyber aspect of it, it's much easier, I think, for some of the cyber people to come through and go, okay, well, here's going to be the
business-like. Yeah, it's interesting because I reckon if you ask most CEOs about their brand, they can tell you intimately why a brand is what the focus groups were saying about the brand and why we've changed this direction. And if you ask them about the P&L, they'll clearly know that down as well as the CFO, and they know the whole marketing stuff, and they'll know what the salespeople are up to. But if you ask them about the IT area in your organisation, they will assume they're not going to understand it, and so they skirt around it. And it's, since that is the greatest enabler for all those other things, it's a huge hole in the organisation.
Actually, all quite interesting. As you say, we've had this conversation for quite a while. It comes down to culture, though. You've got the mismatch of cultures, which, when I was an accountant, my way back, talking to the IT people, it's the same conversation from the 1980s, believe it or not, that show my age, as we're having now, but they don't want to talk to each other. And you've also mentioned the best way to keep your company breach out of the newspapers is not to talk about it, rather than do something about it. Just don't say it, don't report it. How do you get past that? I mean, all the technology in the world, if no one's going to use it or admit, it ain't going to be anything. You're going to have no parallels here. So wondering where all this is heading.
Just from a company point of view, from when you're running your shop and you're working with management, you also have to be aware their revenue line is growing at a certain percentage. You cannot just say, can I double my IT budget this year and then keep it 50% next year? You have to be realistic in terms of managing your budget, your capex and the opex. It is part of running a business. So you're running your shop and then supporting the business. What you can do is you lay out the strategy with them. It's going to take 4 years to achieve all these 4 things that we discussed. It's not going to be 1 year. 1 year, you give me this much. But knowing your revenue line, this is what the business has to do, it's going to take 3 or 4 years. And if they support you, that's what we do. That's the discussion we need to have with the management. And if there is no such discussion and there is no such agreement at the beginning, it's pretty hard. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, exactly. No, I was thinking more like, as one of the guys down there said, it comes from, my view, middle management or just not passing information. Or
that's on the breach, right?
Breach, or even bringing in new systems or using systems with their passive aggressive, not wanting it to happen because it's a whole lot of stuff, right? All internal fraud, all that things going on, which is going to be internal culture. And I don't see how you get past that.
I wonder whether these days of social media, how long an organisation can keep a breach actually
underground. You are aware that's just electronic graffiti. You shouldn't be paying any attention to it.
Well,
you're right,
but, well, doesn't matter. I think it's all graffiti or something.
Yeah, that's right.
You're just jealous because you didn't get a knighthood.
But I wonder whether you can keep a lid on it these days. But I think there are organisations that just don't know that they've been breached and don't look for the indicators. And the key thing is having the indicators. What's the Horizon breach report say? It's massive. It is in a couple hundred days. 10 minutes to do and a couple hundred days to discover. So this is really about the time to protect question. It's not. So it's great to stop the threat. There's no doubt, and we should stop the bulk of them through good hygiene, good deployment of technologies, and the right people to run those. We need to recognise that that is still invariably going to fail. And then that comes down to what we're increasingly calling inside dimension data is time to protect concept. You need to know I've been breached first. You need to know what to do to secure whatever it is that has happened and get myself back up and running. And we need to shorten those couple hundred days down to preferably a couple of minutes if possible. And in some breaches that happens, right? Increasingly that's automated now in smarter systems. But until we get to that point of awareness, this whole debate is problematic. Until we know that we have a problem, we can't address it.
So segueing again off the point that you made before in terms of the products being fit for purpose, we've got a security vendor in the room, and I guess that, no one in their right mind would go along and buy a car and then take it all onto a third party to get an airbag fitted. But we're doing exactly that with operating systems and networks and all that kind of stuff. So from a checkpoint perspective, how do you see this playing out? How do you make your products more ingrained, easy to use? What's your partnership strategy for people working with Microsoft?
Well, firstly, our products are there largely to stop the vulnerabilities of most other vendors. Yeah. Microsoft is going to be done. Right, Phil?
Yeah.
So there's a complete continual disclosure. We find we also test for vulnerabilities in competitors' stuff that we disclose to them. They occasionally might find something in our stuff. So the whole security industry is actually quite. Phil, you probably know more about this. Quite collaborative on that side.
Absolutely. I was going to say, in terms of the security solutions and the products and stuff that are out there, all vendors do produce, and there is overlap. But I think the products and where Checkpoint try to differentiate is intelligence, right? What point is having a security product if you don't know, one, what's happening internally, two, where it's coming from, and potentially what the impact is. So not having intelligence-led security models or intelligence-led security tools or intelligence complement to security solutions that you have kind of defeats the purpose of investing anyway. Back to the point that Alistair was making before, vulnerability management. Those type of tools again complement the security implementations that go in there. But again, how many organisations proactively invest in analysing how vulnerable they are and potentially where a compromise will come from?
On our staff of 3,000, we have 150 employees dedicated to threat research. They are basically hackers. So there are just 150 out of 3,000 is significant investment. Lots of just a lot more than much larger than us.
Also to add to that, James, collaboration is the word here, and we work closely with the big vendors and things, and this is where, I don't know if you've heard about the Intelli store. So Checkpoint realizes that yes, we do not have, we're not the be-all and end-all for a lot of things. And we've worked with the likes of Eyesight Partners or CrowdStrike, and these people are specialists within their, within their fields. For, let's say, for example, Eyesight Partners focuses on state-sponsored hacks and intelligence around that. So they've got global information on that. What Checkpoint's done is they've partnered with them to say, give us that threat intelligence feed. So we've worked with NetClean, for example. They focus around, in the education space. So, things around cyberbullying or child pornography and those kind of things. That's their specialty. Yeah. So we collaborate with them and work together with them to get that intelligence and feed that to our customers.
And that higher level of intelligence complements the work that's done by our internal threat researchers that update signatures and all the rest of it as well. So, we don't profess to be the expert in everything, and that's where the collaboration comes in, where we actually, target that IP and that intel from people that essentially live and breathe that specific silo and make it relevant, whether it be an FSI, whether it be a telco, an education, etc.
So one of the things I hear a lot of security, like cert managers and so on talk about is the need for actionable threat intelligence. To the point where they can just basically take a rule almost in real time, throw it on the firewall, block this up here, run it for the next 24 hours and that kind of stuff. And as we touched on before in the SMB space, my God, they need that more than anybody else. If they don't have the capabilities, nor can we reasonably expect them to have capabilities.
In fact, they should never have to.
Exactly.
It should just be an automated thing that feeds off that smart network and protects you in real time or as near real time as possible. Because the days, I think, of companies putting in new rules into their firewalls, who doesn't? Who doesn't well? Who knows what they put in when they put them in? It's got to be a real time thing working on. Checkpoint and others are increasing and just monitoring all those boxes they have and working out where those threats are and pushing it out real time. And that's a much smarter way to do it.
We call that threat emulation.
Yeah.
So you set up a sandbox, you don't open any attachments or emails, simulate it. And that's an increasingly growth part of our business, as it is with other businesses.
Just a question about that approach of real-time, vulnerability assessment and action. Where do we draw a line between having an endpoint at all and bringing the intelligence back into the cloud? We provide a clean feed to a customer and then potentially make the endpoint redundant. And we've seen that sort of disruption with software as a service, infrastructure as a service. What about security as a service? Where are we heading with that?
Extending the question, extending that to PPG, Telstra, Optus. If I have a small business, 10 people, 20 people, can I just buy plain vanilla DSL2 or DSL2 plus total protection?
Plus trust.
Yeah.
Or protect the whole network feed coming into the whole country. Just how do we protect the whole country, Phil?
Well, I was going to say,
the technologies.
Will the endpoint ever become redundant?
Yes.
It's evolved. Like when I joined, IT out of uni, the endpoint was very much a laptop and a PC. Today, the endpoint is effectively any device that connects and allows us to get into the corporate network. We can access our corporate applications, our corporate segments via Android or via an iPhone and any other corporate device. So it's no longer just your traditional endpoint there. So from that element, I don't necessarily think that the endpoint will ever go away. It just evolves, and it's how we access that data and what we've got in place to be protected.
And we're increasingly seeing those hybrid approaches to security. So, hardware firewalls and then cloud services that sit either talking to those hardware firewalls or totally different services that plug in devices that talk to each other and share intelligence with each other.
I think we'll probably even notice that there'll probably be an increase on a focus on web security and mail security because everything is connected, and fundamentally we're relying on web connections to do that. So we're going full circle almost. Again, when I first came out of uni.
Absolutely. One of the observations we made this year was that endpoint security is becoming sort of a bit sexy because you realise that not all network security works. So you want to be able to have things on the endpoints to allow you to mitigate problems that have happened, to detect them first and then mitigate them. And so the endpoint's still really critical. The control of that endpoint or some way to hook into that endpoint, whatever the endpoint is, still to your point, it's no longer just a PC, right? But you need to have hooks into all those endpoints to allow you to have some type of control over them and understand what's occurring on them. That's some of the top 5 that I've got.
And I think the silver lining to that endpoint, evolving endpoint issue, I think is managing it. So we've got all these devices. How do we manage all these devices from a single pane of glass? So having a centralised capability to, 1, monitor, 2, absorb the intelligence feeds from either a specialised vendor or the specific implemented vendor as well, and then turn that into remediation and acting on a potential breach in real time, and going down to the point where for that SMB SOHO, it's effectively automated where it doesn't require them to be the IT security gurus in that space, or have to rely on an external IT contractor to do that for them, which is going to essentially chew into the revenue that they're making as a SOHO type business.
What's going to be the impact of all these thousands, millions of devices in the Internet of Things that are going to be basically too dumb to really protect, but are going to allow a kind of access into the network? I mean, there was a case recently, these Wi-Fi controlled light bulbs were highly vulnerable, and allowed people to get in and tamper with the once you're into the network, you can do what you like, and they seem to be presenting like an easy way to get into the network, and more so because there's going to be millions of these things, and they're not going to be smart, they're not going to be made smart because they're essentially very simple things.
I don't think there's a silver bullet, it's just evolution, and based on what you have, also incorporating the education to the individuals and administrators that are working on those devices and those type of technology.
And in 14 years' time, we'll be back to roundtable and we'll be going, oh my God, have we not progressed?
Back in our day, this was a solvable problem. You know, sadly, I think there are points of inflection at all times in the sort of evolution of things. And I don't think yet we've hit that point of inflection where we really embed security in a product from the ground up. Even when we do that, there's still going to be the need for overlaying and understanding, for the bespoke and different things. But until we get to the point where a light bulb manufacturer turns off all the various other things this thing can do, so it's smart, but only smart on rails, then we're going to have that problem. So, well, as I say, we'll still be gainfully employed, sadly. No holidays for us.
So we're going to the Internet of Things. First question is more for Alistair, I guess. And do you see a lot of fractions first? And what kind of projects do you see going there? And also, is the security a concern for them already, or are they just like trying to understand how it's going? And then for checkpoint, like, how do you plan to prepare for this wave?
So I'll start by maybe talking about utilities, because Kurt raised utilities in his introduction. We've seen a really big focus by utilities, critical infrastructure on Simple. It's a no-brainer that we should be setting it right, but we certainly have seen that shift in the last 12 months, that more and more providers of essential services to the public. And they're big users of remote dumb devices, right? Switches and other things. Yeah, they've been doing it for a long time, those networks. And I think they're increasingly seeing the vulnerability of those networks and the need to secure them. Federal government, to its credit, when it comes to SCADA stuff, really tried educating people on SCADA security and flew key people over to the United States to learn from Department of Energy over there. And then they've done train the trainer here. So there's been quite a good shift, I think, in that sort of critical infrastructure utility space. We're seeing that now in the way that we're engaging with those businesses. And in terms of broader Internet of Things, connected cars and all those other things, I see vendors working with those manufacturers, building things in, which is good. But for every time that happens, I suspect there's multiple scores of devices that are released that are just vulnerable and open and talking on networks and doing their particular thing, but vulnerable to others.
The New South Wales Auditor General the other day reported the traffic light system was at great risk. Yeah. I think that's great news. We can all do with fewer bloody traffic lights.
I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. They're vulnerable, let's rip it out. Replace them with roundabouts.
Well, I come from Canberra, so we're used to those. You guys get it.
You only got 3 down.
4 cars.
Hey, we've got the big bash final tonight, don't you? Not Canberra.
Do you come across many organisations that have stubbornly refused to outsource any security? Just,
100%.
Just focus on managing in-house and work with products, whatever products are out there, but don't look at third-party service providers or cloud services. Is that, any thoughts on that? Is that to their own detriment?
I think those IT shops, Will and Michael Hart was talking about everything just want to get everyone connected to the cloud, right? There's a CIO, and he's on the left of the screen, and then on the right is the CIOs that just want to build everything because they don't trust anything. So the reality is most organisations are in the middle somewhere. So everyone's in an evolution from cloud to that. And I think security is just a subset of that. So some of our largest customers, you know, the banks and that sort of stuff, they might be outsourcing parts of their network and using the cloud, and hanging on to the security bit. But absolutely, at some point in time, they might ask the management of the firewall part, then that could be deemed to be part of the network. They'll still hang on to policy and other sorts of aspects of it, right?
Yeah, it really varies organisation to organisation. There are some clearly that will never buy in a third-party service, and good luck to them. I think that in time they'll just have to. It's just impossible to maintain the skill sets, the breadth of understanding of the technologies, how they interact with each other, the threat environment that they're talking about. And that doesn't mean those organisations aren't buying smart bits of kit. The trouble is a smart bit of kit doesn't necessarily protect you unless it works appropriately. In fact, target breach was a classic example. There's no doubt they'd spend a lot of money on technology, but they didn't understand what that technology was doing. So that's a human question. And unless you have those staff that understand what are those red lines on the report for 500 or so alarms that have gone off mean, it's like having a smoke alarm and not reacting when the alarm's going off. We think that's a no-brainer, but for IT security, it's not.
Interesting you mentioned from Michael Hartbeck's Commonwealth Bank CIO. Do you see that as an answer, though, having all internet banking done through the cloud, so that then the banks can have a, say, service that way? So there's little chance of a breach from a home computer, which is the biggest risk that is imposed. Do you see that where do you see that sitting?
Well, that's interesting because I think that was probably the most notable public breach that Michael Hart had in his time at the bank was the teller machines, right? So would he put them onto the cloud? Probably not, because I think you come back to the reputation sort of stuff. So I think there are some parts, but HR systems and employee sort of self-service systems and things like that. These are the things that are moving to the cloud. But I think, as to Johan's point, an organisation, will the bank ever outsource their application, their core banking system, their ATM network? That is so core to them as a business. They can hang on to that for a long time. But other things like CRMs and that type of stuff, they'll absolutely move into it. I think it's a vertical type approach of what customers are going to handle to, and therefore put the IT systems around and protect those IT systems, and what they'll move to the cloud, and then expect the cloud providers to also provide that level of protection.
Because it might take a number of topics here. It's like the reputation thing. It's a risk-based conversation. No one's ever going to be handing across the forensics response team. If they're a bank or something to a third party, they're going to be going, no, absolutely, we're going to be hanging on to that because we know it better than no one else. Managing firewalls, it's potentially something we could be heading up, and there's a stack of them that would be saying if we have one resource that we could share between a couple of the banks, we'd be happy with that because our firewall rules aren't going to be very different to theirs. So it then comes down to what's the risk and the branding. It's like we are absolutely not going to see our name on the front page of the paper because of a data breach. We're going to maintain our destiny there. We can't transfer that risk to someone else.
Exactly, and I think there's hybrid approach as well. What Johan was saying before about what's important to you. Well, obviously our customer data is important to us, but we use a CRM called Salesforce.com, like most other companies do, especially IT companies. But we trust Salesforce with that data. However, to get access to it on our checkpoint, we actually use our mobile cloud control blade, and we force everybody to go through our network, mainly so that we've got visibility of actually who's accessing Salesforce. Because if somebody from R&D was accessing Salesforce at 2 in the morning, you might think that that's not a valid use case of the user doing that, for example. Whereas if it's a salesperson in Australia doing it, maybe that's okay, it's updating his forecast. So there's a lot of this is around visibility. You can't block. This is an escalating arms race. And there's always going to be a way to find vulnerability. The question is how much do you protect and what are your priorities?
We've really focused in the whole conversation around obviously breaches, impact, but the underlying mechanism or message here is external. But I think something that needs to be taken into account as a priority, probably more so than external attacks. Because as you said before, state-sponsored, you're probably going to get compromised, right? Because the targeted attack, they're there specifically to link out an organisation. But what about your disgruntled employees or your inverted commas, your novice or dumb users internally? who do something unbeknownst.
Maybe there's not a valid term, maybe that.
Yeah,
maybe
but
don't
the uneducated user,
average David,
average Joe, the average Joe user is probably the better choice of a word, right? Of course.
You know, was that error message as well? I just kept pressing OK.
Yeah, but it's accepted it. And we participated in a recent survey that we got the findings. There was 700 or just over 700 participants across ANZ, 100 of which were from global, so 100 participants global, just over 100 that were from Australia and New Zealand. So the numbers are pertinent to our geography. And it was roughly 89% of those participants in our region admitted that a breach happened because of an internal compromise, whether it was someone with malicious intent or someone, as I said, the average Joe user. On top of that, they said 95% of the participants actually said and stated that if they had some type of security awareness program internal for various parts of the business, so for your security team, a certain type of awareness and certain levels that dug in deep. Let's say you had a call centre, which tends to have a highly volatile and there's a high level of rotation of people in there. You've got to have an ongoing program for those type of people there to keep them up to speed with what they should or shouldn't be doing and what they should or shouldn't be accepting in an organisation. So
I find those numbers exceptionally high,
yeah,
and it seems to be an unusually enlightened group. So can I ask where those participants came from, how they were chosen, how they were surveyed?
It was a group of organisations across the board in terms of who they were. I can get that information for you. I don't actually have it.
It's done by Dimensional Research.
The research was done by Dimensional Research, and the numbers were brought up from there, where the survey was sent out and a number of questions were asked. And once they collated that
Is
information,
this to like a pre-existing panel or specific individuals from organisations targeted?
Yeah, it was sort of picked up. They've got a database of people that they work with as well, and it was global, so it was done. Yeah.
Okay. Global survey, IT professionals,
and 100 people from Australia, New Zealand.
It's actually 706 participants, and 100 were from ANZ. Yeah.
But people don't really look at what they accept when the conditions in their mobile. Like they did this study in the US, and they had all these conditions, and one of the conditions was to give away their first child.
Yeah.
If they clicked OK, and they didn't even finish the study because there were so many people just accepted the conditions we were thinking. That's
just bringing it back a bit to just to a startup, for example, to a business that's starting at home. I think is it becoming more and more obvious that business starters are not actually taking this into account from the get-go, because what's happening is later, I think, when they're looking at their finance department and they're looking at the budgets, I think they often find that they can't afford to outsource anymore. They can't actually afford to go further than the IT department that they have. Do you think that that's an actual reason that a lot of businesses these days aren't actually outsourcing? They're not actually externalizing the information that they have. Is it because their finances weren't planned for that, and it's all just limited?
Also, maybe about survival. You need to keep your head above the water, right?
Right.
And then if the security, the insurance will not make you survive the business, then you have to make a choice. It's a hard choice. You expose the risk or you survive.
Yeah.
Then as a business owner, you probably say, okay, I'll take that risk. So I'm not saying this is my company. I'm just saying if you are the business owner, you have to make a choice. It's all about choice, right?
Yeah.
If you have enough revenue, enough profit to do all these things, then it's great. But if you don't, this is the trouble. They don't have enough to say, okay, I need to pay all this insurance, the business insurance, the security insurance, all these people, and then the IT people to support me. But you have the business to survive. So it's not their fault. It's more like, from a practical point of view, I think maybe we judge them too much because they just have to survive, and for survival, they just cut corners.
No, I agree 100%. Look, I'm not a startup expert by any stretch. My clients are medium to large organisations, but if you think about the very nature of a startup, they're ideally moving into uncharted territory, and everything is a risk for them.
Yeah.
You know, whether there's going to be pickups in the client base, whether there's going to be a competitor that moves on board, you know, everything's a risk, so they've got to accept a whole stack of risk. And I reckon that the technical aspect is just one fine slither of all of the other risks that they have to be happy to engage, or else they'd never get out of bed.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just saying it's like it's one.
Very optimistic, and I say, yeah, we'll be fine today.
It's like business cards are not one of the first things that you get done. It's more important about the relationships.
So one of the other issues that you highlighted in that list of things is this sort of the rise of open source vulnerabilities. So we've seen things emerge like Heartbleed, which is code that people, going to code that. What can we do to improve that? Because the code's out there. It should be possible for someone to identify these things, and yet it took years for that to show up. Can we do anything about that, or are we just stuck with learning about these when they happen?
We've always assumed it's open source, that the crowd tests it, right?
But
rather than the crowd saying, well, if everyone else is using it, it's got to be okay.
1,000 eyeballs.
That's right.
Focusing on that part, right?
Yeah. Not one person finds it. Bizarre. I don't know, Angus. It's a great question, because that actually destroys the argument that used to be put against paying for a Microsoft or other product, because I've got this open source stuff and all the code's all open and everyone can look at it,
but no one did.
No one did. Right? So it was all the boxes were there to be open, and people didn't. So I think it just highlights that we're using particularly complex things. We make a pretty rational human assumption that complex thing works because we haven't seen it not work. Bit of a throw some salt over your left shoulder as well and hope that nothing bad's going to happen, and just go and do what everyone else does. And until I'm shown to be wrong, what's wrong with me doing what everyone else does? I mean, businesses have to be pretty rational in where they invest, to the points made earlier. They can't over-invest in stuff that, there is, surprisingly, there's a lot of charlatanism in what gets sold too. In terms of consulting and kit and other things, and you can overspend on this stuff and still be vulnerable. So things like the Heartbleed one go to the very core of how we've operated for such a long time. And it interests me that we didn't ask, again at the time, bigger questions about, well, does this mean we need to fundamentally change the way we're rolling out technology? It's a media cycle that lasts a couple of days and it's gone. If it's a couple of days.
Well, there was a new iPhone coming out. We had other things to do. But
I wear my Heartbleed T-shirt around. People think I've just got a love heart on my thing.
To put that more specifically in a checkpoint context, so you've got 150 people who are doing sort of vulnerability research. Are any of them focused specifically on open source? Is that because that would seem clearly it's used quite widely? So
I'm sure.
So we discovered a hole in the Wikipedia code, and obviously we disclosed it to them. They patched it and whatever, and yes, that's an example. So we do a lot of that. We've also disclosed something around the Android operating system. So we work very closely with people that actually own that code and things, and do things with them. And before anything's done or disclosed publicly, we've already in the background.
It's about playing nicely.
Although I do
also, a lot of people buy things. It's really around the architecture. We find ourselves having more and more conversations with customers about the architecture of what they're doing. They're doing workshops, and because the world's not just about Checkpoint. There's other bits and pieces. And I mean, the security IT market is an $18 billion market. We're doing 1.5 billion of it. So there's a lot of other stuff that clearly people find value in. And sometimes it works well, and sometimes we find, Phil was at one recently in a tier 2 bank that thought they had a bunch of vendor B and C sort of stuff, and they had an infection of malware right through, and botnets communicated back to China, right, Phil? And they were absolutely staggered to see what their network was infested with. And all we did was come and do a free security checkup, and then said, as a result of that, we'll do a workshop with you for a couple of days. And wow, it was like Christmas. To us it was. But to them it was shocking, it was horrifying, it was everything someone's been telling me for many years is not been effective. But it could have been effective if it was architected in a different way.
That's right. Well, there's a couple of observations there. One is we are seeing increasingly an increasing number of organisations asking us to come in and say what's happening on the network, so that awareness piece. Because you don't, again, you don't know what you don't know, and there are two types of organisations, those that I think are still willfully blind. If they're large enough organisations, that's exactly what they are, and or arrogant, and then those that actually do want to know what's happening on the system. So we're doing a huge number of those, and finding the types of things that Kurt mentioned, you know, and a lot of it comes down to misconfiguration, not tying things in together, not understanding how different bits of kit work together, because it's not all just plug and play with this stuff, and just because that works doesn't mean it talks to the next thing as well. So there's that understanding of that integration side, and then there's the monitoring the output bit, which again, we're having a decrease in capability in a lot of organisations to do. So, yeah, it's not that people aren't spending money, it's are they spending it wisely? And do they spend as much as they can?
And also to the point of which was made earlier, you've got the middle level people, or the people that get their hands dirty. They get aware of, you know, they're made aware of all these things. How much of that information is actually passed on to the top, or is they try to cover it up? And I think that's where, you know, it comes back to regulation or you know, information sharing just within the organisation, or is my job on the line? Those kind of things.
Regulations in Australia from multinationals based in the US or Europe, whereas like the other ones based more in Asia or other Australia, and but also that they're cleanliness, let's say, in their infrastructure.
So before you answer, I was talking to Johan about this before. We've got some experience of having standard, you know, the way the US guys would view things versus the way you've done things here.
This is about the IPS.
Yeah.
I think what happened is people thinking when you start putting all these additional protection, you have to put extra resources. I guess again you have to analyze the risk profile. What you have to do, you really have to, like you say, I call it every day, 24/7, or you can just do it every 2 weeks. So what we do, we analyze it every 2 weeks, then we implement changes. So the changes happen in 4 weeks. The US will actually happening, implementing the whole thing now, thinking we have to add a new resource. Based on what we've done 1.5 years, we say, no, we don't have to, we can work as a team, you guys do the thing, and then we do it as a 3 region. We can spend less than a day to analyze this every month. So I think it depends, it's getting back to the business risk management and profile. You cannot just say we have to do this 24/7 if the business profile it doesn't go that way. You can, but I don't think it's responsible to do that. So it try to be like a balancing act. How much you have to do versus the risk profile. You cannot just put a blanket, okay, we have to do this thing, because then the business will say, sorry, we cannot have that, because again, it's running the business versus supporting the business as well.
So for your case, for example, are all your decisions of implementation made in the US, or do you do it
we sort of like a global committee, and all the head of IT, we also report to the committee as well. So there is a very good close relationship between all the partner management and us. So that's where the risk profile comes from. The business risk is nothing to do with IT management. I mean, we go into the business, say, what sort of risk profile will LEK have? And then we cannot tell them that they're the owner of the business, right? And we support that business risk profile. And that's where they have to buy in, and that's where we have to work together. We can go all the way, which is not financially justified. So we say, that's where we need your help to tell us, so we can balance the left and the right extreme in some way in the middle.
Well, yeah, I see you're a global company as well, so you do a lot of globals.
So think it's an interesting question because to Johan's point before, a lot of this is industry by industry. So the large trade exposed Australian industries that are, say big Australian companies that are exposed, they're increasingly aware of this type of stuff and invest pretty heavily. US firms, obviously, because the US has a whole range of compliance requirements, depending on what industry you're in, will often clearly need to roll that out globally, and if you want to then play as a correspondent bank with those things, you might need to meet those requirements. Which, having argued for regulation at the start of this lunch, is a place where to put some caution into as well. You run the risk of ending up as a compliance type regime and focusing your security on compliance, ticking the compliance box, not necessarily making yourself secure. And I think it's two things that are necessary. If the compliance regime raises the level of thought about security, it gets you thinking about risk and how to position yourself and what will happen when things go wrong, invariably as they will, then that's a good thing. When a compliance regime, which sometimes you do see in some countries, becomes so pervasive that it's only about meeting the compliance box, and some governments can be like this in Australia too, of course, then you're not necessarily secure. You think you are because you tick the boxes. Well, we're compliant. We're PCI compliant, therefore. But PCI compliance can be a box ticking exercise too, albeit with some expensive kit and other things depending on what level you are. So we do see it vary from country to country. The multinationals, by their nature, because they play in so many jurisdictions, will often care more about these things. For good and logical reasons. They tend to be bigger companies too. But there are a lot of very non-naive Australian companies as well who are investing very heavily. The sadness to me after all these years is the patchiness of that. That it can be sector by sector that we're educating, that's good. But there are so many more sectors to go and so many more businesses that haven't even started on that journey. And that's the danger to us. Because on that concept of the supply chain and the interconnected devices and people, you only need a few of those places to totally fail, to actually be catastrophically damaging others.
Yeah, well, if a company like Sony, huge, can't protect its own information or its customers, what is the hope for small Australian companies?
Pretty serious attack record, haven't you?
Yeah, well, and
Sony's not a good example.
So I know some of you have got to get away for deadlines, and others will probably be happy to stay brick all afternoon. Thank you.
They had a good
But we've got. I just thought I'll use this opportunity to. We're having our Checkpoint Experience CPX on the 2nd of June in Sydney, and one of the speakers is Brian Krebs. He's actually going to be keynoting at that, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard of him. He's disclosed a lot of things from the loser squad, not lizard squad. So
what's the event?
CPX, it's Checkpoint. So what we're doing is we've got quite a lot of. Alistair's going to be speaking at that.
Our annual end user partner. We had it in Melbourne last year.
That's right. Yeah.
Where do you hold it in Sydney? We haven't got any good venues.
We haven't.
Well, we found, interesting you asked.
Yes, we haven't. But the only option, and we're going to run with it, is Luna Park. So we're going to make it fun.
There you go, it'll be fun too.
Actually, the Melbourne following VMware into Luna Park.
The Melbourne one was an excellent.
We had 400 people in Melbourne. It was the first time a big security event had happened in Melbourne. I think we're going to get 700 or 800. So, please all come along and
we plan to.
We'll have a lot of global executives, not just from Checkpoint, but from all of our partners.
So Mike Burgess from Telstra is committed to speak there. We've got one of the CISOs from the big bank speaking there. So the whole morning is dedicated to security, not Checkpoint. It's the afternoon streams, which is the product stuff. But the morning is security, and I think that's...
CEO coming out?
Yes.
Still negotiating.
He's put his hand up,
Yeah.
so things could change.
He's a pretty passionate guy. A bit intense.
Yeah. But thanks to all of you coming along today, and
thanks. It's been good.